So my name's Sean Kelly. I'm the Range Field Specialist with SDSU Extension out of the Winter Field office. I'm also the liaison officer for the Mid-Missouri River Prescribed Burn Association. I'd say probably 3/4 of my job is working with Dave and the rest of the Burn Association. I help Dave and a couple others with doing a lot of the burn plans. And then the days of the fire, I am out there assisting with those as well. I do bring some equipment from the Gregory Fire Department to help out every once in a while. It's been a lot of fun, and I've been really grateful to be very involved with this burn association and to get the prescribed burning going in South Dakota. Just going to talk quickly on the three methods of controlling the eastern red cedar: prescribed fire, mechanical control, chemical control. Obviously, I'm not going to touch too much on chemical control. It's really cost prohibitive and not really that great of a practice, but I'm going to touch on the mechanical and prescribed fire quite a bit. So on the mechanical methods, some of you are probably well aware of them here with the conservation districts. They're cost sharing. More and more conservation districts are starting to cost share with mechanical methods. You can have the shearers or the saws on the front of the skid steers, chainsaws, bulldozers. Although if you are going to use a bulldozer, we've worked with a couple of producers with the Burn Association who put in fire breaks with bulldozers, and you do have a lot of soil disturbance with those, and it takes a long time for that grass to come back. But mainly the skid steers with those attachments. And I do have a couple of videos kind of showing them in action if you haven't seen those before. So talking on the clipping, cedars can be killed if they're cut at the ground level below the first green branch. You know, if you slice that cedar tree off and you got 2 or 3 branches still coming out of that trunk, that cedar's still going to keep growing. You need to get all the way to the bottom. And I've also seen that on some of the shredder equipment. I know some conservation districts, some landowners have shredders. You know, you got to be real careful. If that shredder isn't getting all the way to the ground to that bottom branch, you're still going to have the issue there. If clipped at ground level, the cedar will not regrow or resprout. Even clipping 3 inches above the ground may not be effective in some cases, especially if there's still green branches there. And the cedars can be killed by clipping any time of the year. And that's just kind of an example of how low you need to get. This was on a ranch that I was on in Kansas. That's just an example of how low you need to get. Here's on Grimm's Ranch north of Bone Steel. On some shearing we did up there, you can see how low you need to get when you're shearing. So the mechanical methods, like I mentioned, especially with the bulldozer, soil disturbance can sometimes be significant. Steep terrain can limit access by machines. Those of us that are in the river breaks along the Missouri River, there's just spots where you're not going to be able to get to with that skid steer. And the bigger trees you get, sometimes you need larger equipment as well. This is Keith Horvorka's skid steer with his clipping attachments. He's the president of our Burn Association. And these are kind of the examples of getting into some rough area. I don't know if you can read his Snapchat comments there, but this is going to be interesting, getting that out with a track half off. He got into a little rough area in the river breaks, but he did get it back out. And then you also got a beautiful view when you are clipping right along the river. This is another picture of some clipping that he'd done after he got done clipping. Then he put his grapple attachment back on and started tucking all those cedar trees. And I'm going to touch on that when we're talking about tucking and stuff. And he's tucking them into that. You can see this is a pretty thick stand here. And we're tucking all those trees in to build some ladder field to get that to burn. This is another attachment. One of the producers we work with as well. This is a shredder machine. I have a video. I don't know if it's going to work or not. That kind of shows, not that one, but a different one in action, and kind of how that works. Another example is having that saw in front of your skid steer. I haven't seen anybody with one of those. I've just mainly seen the ones with the shears clipping them off. If you've ever seen these shredders in action, they're pretty impressive. They come down the cedar tree and they just shred it all to pieces and everything just flies all over the place. I'll talk about some of the downfalls with that as well. And this was just another video I had of a skid steer doing some clipping. So on the prescribed fire, talk about that as another method. Most environmentally appropriate and cost-effective practice for maintaining ecosystems in prairies and shrublands. The prescribed fire, you can have high intensity or low intensity prescribed fire. When we're talking about that, the low intensity prescribed fires are when you're controlling your cedars. These are like when we're talking about maintenance burns. Your cedars are 4 to 6 foot tall, not any higher, and you can kill those cedars if you have a good fine fuel load. If you have 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per acre of forage, a good fuel base to start with, that will usually get those cedars that are 4 to 6 foot tall. When they start getting taller, then you have to start moving into a different type of burn, where we're talking high intensity burns, where we need to do some shearing and then stuff those dead trees to build extra fuel, to build that ladder fuel, to get that fire hotter, so we can get a crown fire going and get those really thick infestations burning. Maintenance burns every 3 to 5 years, just like Tom was talking about what he's going to be doing on his place moving forward. And those are to keep those little ones, the ones you don't see, as well as the ones under 4 foot tall, keep those at bay. And I'll talk about the cutting and stuff in here. So this was an example of a burn on Grimm's where we had a good, probably 4,000 pounds per acre of fuel. That tree there is about 8 to 10 feet, so we're kind of going just over that threshold of what you can get. Just real quick on the chemical control, the herbicides are not frequently used for cedar control. It's cross prohibitive. Cedars show resistance to foliar applied herbicides as well. The direct access to tree trunks or roots can be difficult, especially in some of those real thick cedar infestations that I showed you. It can make the application challenging. And then most of the research I've seen out of Oklahoma State and even in K-State, the effectiveness of herbicides declines as the size of the tree increases. Mechanical control needs follow-up fire. And I want to make sure I get that clear today. I'm not saying one or the other. Every person's piece of ground is going to be unique. But if you do any kind of mechanical treatments, whether it's shearing, shredding, chainsaws, it needs to be followed up with a prescribed burn, because otherwise those little cedars, you're going to open up that canopy. You'll have a massive germination of cedar seedlings will establish from the existing seed bank. And there's also been a little bit of research out there with the shredding, with large amounts of the cedar mulch. That can sometimes negatively affect the pH in your soils if you have a real large amount of cedar mulch going into your ground. So that's one of the other drawbacks of the shredding if you don't follow up with a prescribed burn to burn those up. This is an example of a ranch I was on in Kansas when I worked for NRCS down there. I was just a new student trainee, and my boss, the DC, he said, take a picture of that, because that is what happens when you just do clipping and you don't follow up with a burn. You can see you're going to have 5 or 6 cedar trees coming afterwards if you don't follow up with that burn. These are kind of hard to see, but this is back on Grimm's north of Bone Steel. Right there is the tree trunk where the tree was clipped. And over here you can see all the little cedars coming after that was clipped. So you can see the importance of having that prescribed fire even after you clip. Here's just another example. There's the tree trunk there. All these little cedars are coming. You need mechanical in some spots, but you have to follow up with that prescribed burn. Dense, large cedar infestations may require mechanical treatments to be used in conjunction with prescribed burning to achieve high-intensity fires for reclaiming rangeland. Like we said, on maintenance burns, if all your cedar trees are in that 4 foot range, 4 to 6 foot range, and you have a good fine fuel load, you should be able to get them with just a burn. But everything along the Missouri River where those trees can be 20, 30, 40 foot tall, and they're just really thick infestations, and you're basically doing reclamation of rangeland, you got to do the mechanical along with the fire. Them two just go hand in hand. And so that's where we get into this cutting and stuffing. More damage to large cedars can be accomplished by creating that ladder fuel. Ladder fuels are the flammable, live, or dead plant material that allows a ground or surface fire to climb into the tree canopy. It can increase your fire intensity and create longer flames needed to control larger trees and increase the effectiveness of most of your prescribed burns. Here's an example on Rich and Sarah Grimm's ranch. They were on that video from Bone Steel at the beginning of the workshop. Here's a line of trees that they had sheared, and they stuff them into the larger infestations here so we can get those flame lengths to get those 40-foot cedars and get those burned up. That's what we're talking about with the cutting and stuffing. And there's a lot of planning that goes into that. On the cutting and stuffing, it's been real exciting, in the last year or two with NRCS coming on board. And now we're working with NRCS with guys who have brush management EQIP cost share contracts. We're coordinating with NRCS, so when they do the brush management and they're out there shearing their cedar trees, we can shear the cedar trees in areas that will assist in having a good prescribed burn. Because when you're cutting and stuffing, you can't just cut them wherever and stuff them. Ideally, if you're going to cut cedar trees and stuff them, if you're on a steep hillside, you want them on the lower elevation so that flame lake reaches up the hill and you have that chimney effect. So you're catching those cedars going up the hill. If it's on more of a flat ground, then you want your pile on the side from where your wind's going, so the wind blows the flame lengths into the cedars that are not cut on the upwind side. This was on Rich and Sarah Grimm's. You can see with about 4,000 or 5,000 pounds per acre, that tree up there is about 10 foot, and with a good fuel load, it's getting fully engulfed. That's the importance of having a good, decent fuel load before you do your prescribed burn. Now over here, we're on a steep hillside, and you can see which way the wind's coming, and we don't have any tucking or stuffing here, and that's probably a 15, 20 foot tree on each side. And you can see it's not going to catch, it's not going to completely burn that entire tree there. But those are just areas where they couldn't get with the Bobcat to clip those. Maybe they could have clipped them with the chainsaw, but as we're doing maintenance burns every 3 to 5 years, there'll be more opportunities to catch these again, as well as keeping the little ones that are being killed all around there and opening that up. We'll keep those at bay as well. You can kind of see how this kind of peters out with the wind going that way, your flame lengths going that way. And you can kind of see the importance of having that. I'll show you some other pictures with the tuck piles on the lower elevation with the flame lengths hitting up the hill, and we're able to catch that.
Okay, thank you.
So here we had quite a bit of tucking and stuffing along here. And you can see by adding that increased fuel from those cedar trees that we tucked and stuffed, how it increases the intensity of that fire. This is a high intensity fire that we're reclaiming rangeland with versus a maintenance burn where we're catching the cedar trees that are 4 and 5 foot tall. If you're going to reclaim rangeland like this, especially in the river breaks, this is where that mechanical control plays a critical factor along with your prescribed burning. And that's just another picture of the same spot. Right there, we were actually putting the black lines in on the other side of the tuck lines where we were burning. I mean, in the end, no single practice is ideal for every parcel of land, but fire is a natural event that is necessary if the land is to remain healthy. And that's really what I wanted to get across on these control methods, because I know a lot of conservation districts are working with mechanical control now, and there's grants out there to get it done. Just keep in mind that fire needs to get worked into those. You need to follow up those mechanical treatments with fire. And even in some cases, in the real extreme cases, especially in the river breaks, the mechanical control, you absolutely need it to have an effective burn. Like on Tom's burn, the one we were on in here, this was an extreme burn. He had some very thick cedar stands in there, and there was a lot of tucking and stuffing and a lot of piles, and it was a very high intensity fire, and it's going to take quite a few of those to get that all reclaimed again. Any questions?
What about your hardwood indigenous?
The desirable hardwood trees, you might get a little loss on some of these really intense fires. We did one on Justin and Sarah Bailey's north of Bonesteel, where it was about as intense as that, and it wiped out the cedar trees, and all the desirable hardwood trees are still there. They'll come back, if they're pretty good size. If they're smaller, you'll obviously lose them, but no, that has never been an issue in the prescribed burns that we've done in the river breaks as of yet. So the question is deferring your pasture for a year to get that fuel load to do a prescribed burn. On the maintenance burns, ideally probably no less than 3,000 pounds per acre, especially in this area. maybe even 4,000 pounds per acre. You know, is that going to take you a year to get that? I don't know. It depends on what condition your pastures are in now. If a person's pastures have been grazed pretty close, yeah, it might take a year to get that regrowth back. You know, if somebody's lightly grazing their pastures or moderately grazing their pastures, kind of following the take half, leave half, and has a prescribed grazing plan and a prescribed grazing schedule, then you may not need that full year deferment because you'll already have the fuel load there. But deferment after the burn is also as important as the deferment before as well, to let those grasses recover. So the question is, how long do you have to leave the skeleton there, or how long before it's too hard to cut? So like on, I'm not sure on Tom's, but on like Greg Schmitz's, another guy we work with in the river breaks, he doesn't mess with the carcasses. After it's burned, I don't even think you did on yours either, Tom. We don't mess with them as long as you got a good burn through there. It's going to open that canopy up enough to let those grasses come back through. And those carcasses may even keep the cattle out of there for a little bit to let that grass kind of recover. But eventually, the cattle just start going in there and grazing. That's what we saw on Greg's and what we saw on Tom's.
When you did burn your cut and stuff piles, did it burn into the areas that were not cut?
Yeah.
How far, the whole thing?
It varied. On Tom's, it didn't go very far because it was a later burn and the trees were, it didn't go as far in as we liked. On some of these videos, like on Rich and Sarah's, the tuck and stuff piles really lit it up and it burned right on through. Like on Justin Bailey's, it's kind of something similar to this, where the tucking and stuffing and it caught a crown fire and it just went all the way through the finger ridge and just cleaned it all out. Dave will actually have some pictures of that as well.